Imagine waking up not in your cozy bed, but in a small, dark Roman insula, a cramped apartment made of creaky wood and dusty bricks, where the morning light barely slips through the cracks of a single window. The smell hits first, a mixture of smoke, sweat, olive oil, and sewage. You might think life in ancient Rome was all grand marble temples, shining armor, and banquets with grapes and wine. But the truth is, for most Romans, it was noisy, dirty, and brutally demanding. The empire's heart, the city of Rome, pulsed with life, but it was far from the romantic version you've seen in movies. As the sun rises, the streets come alive with the shouts of merchants selling bread, slaves carrying water, and donkeys pulling carts filled with amphorae of wine and fish sauce. You'd probably struggle to walk through the narrow alleys without stepping in something unpleasant. The Romans didn't have flush toilets for most citizens. Only the rich had access to private latrines. Everyone else had to make do with public ones, where a shared sponge on a stick served as toilet paper rinsed between uses in the same bucket of water. Imagine trying that after your morning coffee. Hygiene wasn't exactly the empire's strength, but maybe you'd think the Roman baths would save you luxurious marble halls with warm pools, perfumes, and massages. Not quite. They were often packed, steamy, and filled with gossip, grime, and the smell of oil and sweat. A Roman bath was as much a social hub as a hygiene stop. And if you didn't know the right etiquette, like scraping oil off your body with a spray gel instead of soap, you'd stand out immediately. Worse, the water wasn't always clean, and diseases thrived in such places. Now, breakfast, if you were poor, you'd eat barley porridge or bread dipped in wine. The rich might add fruit or cheese, but most people barely had enough to eat. Grain handouts from the state, called the unknowna, kept the urban poor alive. Miss the distribution day, and you might go hungry. Food was a political tool. Emperors used it to keep the people quiet. Bread and circuses, as the saying went. And speaking of circuses, by midday, the roar of the Colosseum echoed across the city. Imagine the crowd, 50,000 spectators, screaming as gladiators fought to the death. Wild animals charged from cages, and criminals were executed in theatrical displays. Entertainment was violent, but deeply Roman. Refuse to cheer, and you might be seen as unpatriotic. The air was hot, heavy, and thick with the smell of blood and sand. If you think you could stomach it, think again. Many spectators fainted, and some even got sick from the heat and horror. Let's say you try to find work. Unless you were born rich, that meant hard labor. You could haul bricks at construction sites, serve as a porter, or work as a servant. If unlucky, you might end up enslaved. Nearly 1/3 of Rome's population were slaves, with no rights and harsh punishments. Slavery fueled the empire's greatness, from the villas of senators to the galley ships of the navy. You'd see slaves everywhere, in kitchens, fields, workshops, and temples. Some could earn freedom, but most lived and died in bondage. Even free citizens didn't have it easy. Fires frequently swept through the city. Buildings collapsed, and diseases spread quickly in the crowded quarters. You couldn't call the fire department or hospital. Those didn't exist. Rome's firefighting force was made up of slaves, and medical care relied on herbs, superstitions, and prayers to asclepius. By evening, The city's energy turned darker, taverns filled with drunks, gamblers, and thieves. Oil lamps flickered in narrow alleys, and the streets became dangerous. Without police, you'd better stay indoors. Crime was rampant. Muggings, assaults, and even kidnappings were common. Women, especially, faced great risk. Rome might have had laws, but justice depended on status and money. The higher your class, the more protection you had. The lower, the more disposable you were. Even the emperors weren't safe. Political intrigue ran deep. Assassinations, poisonings, betrayals. One wrong word about the emperor and you could be accused of treason. You'd either face exile, torture, or execution. So when people imagine living a day in Rome, strolling under the arches, watching chariot races, or dining in candlelight, they forget how relentless it was. The noise never stopped. The smell never faded. The fear of disease, fire, or arrest hung constantly in the air. And yet, Rome functioned an empire of millions, bound by law, roads, and a sense of destiny. That's the paradox. The same civilization that gave us art, architecture, and literature also thrived on blood, slavery, and control. As night falls, you lie down on your straw mattress, the sounds of rats scurrying in the walls, and you realize, no, you wouldn't last a day in the Roman Empire. If you truly want to understand how difficult life was in the Roman Empire, you have to walk a mile in the sandals of an ordinary Roman citizen, not a senator, not a soldier, but one of the countless men, women, and children struggling to survive day after day in the world's most powerful city. The first thing you'd notice is exhaustion. Every morning began before sunrise, not because of discipline, but necessity. Work was hard to find, and if you didn't show up early to claim a spot in the marketplace or by the docks, someone else would. The Forum, Rome's bustling economic and political center, was a chaos of voices. Merchants yelled prices, slaves ran errands for their masters, and beggars pleaded for coins near the temples. The ground was a mixture of mud, straw, and animal waste. You'd keep an eye out for horse-drawn carts rumbling by, splashing filth onto your already tattered tunic. And if you weren't careful, one sharp wheel could crush your foot. There were no traffic rules in ancient Rome, just chaos disguised as normal life. Your day depended entirely on your social status. The upper class, known as patricians, enjoyed leisure, debate, and fine meals. They had running water piped into their villas, marble floors, and slaves to do everything from cooking to reading literature aloud. Meanwhile, you, a plebeian or commoner, lived in a cramped apartment block that could collapse at any moment. These insulae were made of cheap materials and stacked 5 or 6 stories high. The higher your room, the cheaper the rent, but also the more dangerous. Fires broke out frequently from oil lamps or cooking pots. There were no fire escapes, and many perished when entire buildings burned overnight. Even those who survived might lose all their possessions, a few pieces of pottery, some clothes, and maybe a wooden stool or two. If you were a man, your day revolved around labor. Builders, stonemasons, potters, and porters made the city run, yet earned barely enough to feed their families. You might spend 12 hours carrying heavy loads under the scorching Mediterranean sun, earning a handful of coins. Women, on the other hand, faced an even harder existence. They managed the home, cared for children, cooked meals, and often worked as vendors or servants. A Roman woman's life was defined by her household, her value measured by her obedience, fertility, and reputation. The wealthy women wore jewelry and silk, but ordinary wives wore simple wool dresses and walked through dangerous alleys to fetch water or sell goods. Harassment and exploitation were constant threats. Rome was not kind to the powerless. You might think education offered a way out, but schooling was a privilege. Boys from rich families studied Latin, Greek, philosophy, and rhetoric, preparing for political life. Poor children, if they learned anything, did so by watching and working. Writing tablets and scrolls were luxuries. Most of the population was illiterate. Religion, however, united everyone. Temples were everywhere to Jupiter, Mars, Venus, and dozens of other gods. Every home had a small shrine called a lararium, where families offered prayers to their household spirits. Festivals were frequent and sacrifices common. If crops failed or an illness spread, people blamed the gods and flocked to the temples to seek mercy. Life was uncertain, and divine favor was everything. The food problem was constant. Even if you worked all day, your meals were meager: bread, olives, maybe a few beans. Meat was a luxury, fish expensive, and fruit seasonal. Wine was common, but cheap wine was mixed with vinegar and herbs to hide its sourness. You couldn't drink water safely; it was often polluted. So, even the poor drank diluted wine daily to avoid disease. Imagine your energy drained, your stomach half empty, yet still having to push through the crowds and noise, dodging beggars, carts, and soldiers. Yes, soldiers. The city was full of them, proud and intimidating in their armor. They weren't there to protect you. They maintained order, especially if riots broke out over food shortages or politics. By afternoon, the heat became unbearable. Rome's climate was warm, but the stone and brick turned the city into an oven. Many found shade in bathhouses, not to relax, but to socialize, wash off grime, and hear gossip. These baths were the social heartbeat of Rome, filled with laughter, arguments, and deals. But even they had a darker side: theft, disease, and moral corruption. The wealthy flaunted their bodies and wealth, while the poor could only observe. You'd sit in the corner, pretending not to notice the hierarchy that followed you, even in the steamy air. When evening came, the forum emptied, but the taverns came alive. These dimly lit places offered cheap wine, gambling, and the illusion of escape. Laughter mixed with curses, and fights broke out easily. Prostitutes walked the alleys, and pickpockets lurked in shadows. The city's poor tried to forget their struggles with drink, knowing tomorrow would bring the same hardship. For entertainment, some gathered around storytellers or street performers, or even sang songs mocking politicians, though that could be dangerous. Speaking against authority was a crime. The emperor's spies, known as delatores, listened everywhere, ready to report disloyalty. One rumor could mean arrest or exile. If you somehow survived all that, you'd still face the greatest enemy of all: disease. Rome was overcrowded, and sanitation was poor. The Tiber River, once sacred, was choked with waste. Plagues and fevers spread fast. Doctors existed, but medicine was primitive, a mix of herbs, bloodletting, and prayer. A simple infection could kill you. Most people died young, rarely living past 40. children often didn't survive infancy. And yet, despite it all, the Romans endured. They worked, prayed, and dreamed of stability. They took pride in their city, Roma Eterna, the eternal Rome, even if eternity felt fragile as the night settled. Torches flickered on the streets, casting long shadows on the walls. Somewhere, a man played a flute, a woman whispered a prayer, and a child cried in hunger. You'd close your eyes, exhausted, your body aching, your stomach growling, and realize survival in Rome wasn't just about strength. It was about acceptance. You didn't live hoping for comfort or change. You lived to see another sunrise. That, in the end, was the true endurance of the ordinary Roman, surviving every day in an empire built on glory, blood, and the will to keep moving forward. By now, you'd think you've seen everything Rome had to offer: the chaos, the heat, the filth, the struggle. But beneath the surface of ordinary life beat the true heart of the empire: power. Every street, every stone, every citizen's breath was somehow connected to the grand machinery of control that made Rome the mightiest force in the ancient world. From the emperor seated on his gilded throne to the beggar curled up beside a temple column, every life revolved around hierarchy. Rome wasn't just a city, it was a living organism, pulsing with ambition, greed, and fear. The emperor was the head, the senate, the voice, the soldiers its limbs, and the people, the blood that kept it alive. But blood, as history shows, can flow too easily. Imagine waking up one morning to the sound of soldiers' boots echoing through the streets. Rumors swirl. Someone spoke against the emperor, or a senator has been accused of treason. Rome's politics were theater and warfare combined. In the Senate House, men in togas debated loudly about virtue and justice, yet most of them plotted in whispers. Alliances shifted daily. Gold could change loyalties faster than a sword. To rise in power, you needed influence. To stay alive, you needed silence. The emperors knew this well. From Julius Caesar to Nero, paranoia ruled the Palatine Hill. Spies and informants filled the city, and public trials often ended in executions disguised as justice. If you lived in Rome, you never truly felt safe. Even your friends could betray you for favor or fear. The Roman people, however, loved spectacle. They were kept distracted by what the politicians called panem et circenses, bread and circuses. Free grain distributions fed the poor, and the Colosseum entertained the masses with games of unimaginable brutality. The emperors knew that as long as the people were entertained, they would not rebel. Imagine standing in that colossal arena, the air thick with dust and blood. Trumpets blare, gates open, and a gladiator steps into the sun, raising his sword toward the emperor's box. The crowd roars as two men fight for survival, one for glory, one for freedom. You watch, heart pounding, knowing that this is not just entertainment, it's a symbol of control. Every death reminds the crowd who holds power over life itself. And when the victor kneels, awaiting the emperor's thumb up for mercy, down for death, it's the empire's power made flesh. But Rome's glory came at a price. The wealth that built marble temples and paved the great roads came from conquest and exploitation. The empire stretched from the deserts of Egypt to the forests of Britain, and every province paid tribute in gold, grain, and slaves. Soldiers fought endless wars to expand the borders, often returning home broken or not at all. Entire civilizations were absorbed, their gods renamed, their cultures reshaped in Rome's image. It was an empire of assimilation and domination, where even the conquered learned to worship their conquerors. Yet beneath this mighty image lay cracks. The more Rome grew, the more it consumed. Corruption ate through the system like rot through wood. Tax collectors demanded more. Governors stole from the provinces, and the Senate, once noble, became a den of privilege. Justice favored the rich. Punishment crushed the poor. If you wandered near the Forum at night, you'd hear whispers of assassinations, poison plots, or secret affairs between noble families. The emperors themselves were not above scandal. Caligula declared himself a living god. Nero, obsessed with art and performance, allegedly burned Rome just to inspire his creativity. Domitian executed senators on suspicion alone. And yet the city continued because fear kept order better than faith. Roman law was everywhere, carved on stone tablets, recited in courts, enforced by the sword. Even the poorest citizen knew the power of the law and its bias. You could be punished for stealing bread, yet a noble might escape punishment for murder. The hierarchy was absolute. Religion, too, was a tool of control. Temples stood on every corner, and processions filled the streets in honor of Jupiter, Mars, and Venus. Emperors were deified after death, their statues worshipped as divine. To question the gods, or the emperor's divine right, was dangerous. Yet under this polytheistic surface, a quiet revolution began. Small groups of strange believers gathered secretly, speaking of one God, one Savior, and equality among all. They were called Christians, and at first the Romans mocked them. Later, they hunted them. To refuse sacrifice to the emperor's spirit was treason. Thousands were executed, burned, crucified, or fed to beasts, all for faith. You'd wonder, standing in the crowd, watching them die, what kind of belief could make someone face such terror calmly? It was something the empire could not understand, and something that would one day transform it forever. As the day ends, you might look at the grand city from a hill, marble temples glowing in torchlight, the Tiber reflecting golden ripples, the Colosseum's arches shadowed against the stars. It's breathtaking, almost eternal. Yet beneath that beauty lies exhaustion. The empire's heart beats too fast, its ambition consuming itself. For all its roads, laws, and art, Rome's foundation was built on exploitation. Every luxury of the rich came from the pain of the poor. Every victory was bought with blood, and yet this contradiction, this fragile balance of glory and decay, was what made Rome so enduring. If you tried to sleep that night, you'd hear the city's hum, the murmur of crowds, the creak of wagons, the distant cries from the amphitheater. Rome never truly slept. Its people dreamed of power, survival, and immortality. And maybe that's why, even now, centuries later, we still can't stop talking about it. The empire may have fallen, but its shadow never did. For in every civilization that rose afterward, Rome's lessons and its warnings lived on. And as your eyes close, you'd understand the truth behind the title. You wouldn't last a day in the Roman Empire, not because it lacked greatness, but because its greatness demanded too much from those who lived within it. If you ever believed that serving in the Roman army was a path to glory, you might want to think again. Behind every shining helmet and every victorious march through conquered lands, there was a life forged in relentless discipline, fear, and exhaustion. Imagine yourself waking up not in a soft bed, but on the cold ground of a military camp somewhere along the empire's frontier. Maybe in the damp forests of Germania or the burning deserts of Egypt. The air bites your lungs, the scent of sweat and iron fills your nostrils. And before dawn even touches the horizon, the centurion's voice cuts through the dark like a blade. You don't question it, you move, because a soldier's life doesn't belong to himself. It belongs to Rome. The empire doesn't care about your comfort, your dreams, or your pain. It only cares that you obey, fight, and win. Every morning begins with drills, endless drills. You march, you form ranks, you raise your shield, you thrust your sword. The weight of your armor, chainmail, helmet, and weapons presses down like a mountain. The training isn't for show. It's to make sure you can move and fight like a machine when chaos erupts in battle. A single mistake can mean death, not just for you, but for your brothers beside you. The discipline is brutal. Disobedience is punished harshly, sometimes by flogging, sometimes by death. In Rome's legions, there's no room for weakness. If a unit shows cowardice, the decimation punishment awaits every 10th man executed by his comrades as a reminder of loyalty. Imagine standing in line, knowing the next man to fall could be you, not for losing a fight, but for being unlucky. That's how Rome kept order, through fear and unity, twisted together. You might think of rebellion, but then you remember the oath you swore, absolute obedience to the emperor and the Senate. Breaking it means dishonor, and dishonor is worse than death. When the marching begins, it's relentless. The legions move across mountains, swamps, and deserts, covering 20 miles a day under full gear. Roads stretch endlessly ahead, the famous Roman roads, built by the same men who walk them. You carry not only weapons, but your tent, cooking pots, rations, and tools, about 40 kilograms, on your back. At the end of the day, you don't rest. You build. Every night, the army constructs a fortified camp with ditches, walls, and watchtowers. It's a ritual that repeats daily, a rhythm of labor that shapes men into endurance itself. When you finally collapse inside your tent, sleep doesn't come easy. You hear distant howls, the murmurs of foreign lands, and the quiet prayers of your comrades, men who miss their homes, their wives, and their freedom. Food is simple: bread, porridge, salted meat, maybe some wine. Luxury doesn't exist for the soldier. You eat fast, often cold, and whatever keeps you alive. Illness is constant blisters, infections, fever, but you keep marching. You learn to fight hunger, cold, and fear the same way you fight the enemy, without hesitation. And when battle finally comes, it's chaos. Trumpets sound, commands echo, and the earth trembles beneath thousands of feet. The legion forms like a machine, shields locked, spears ready, swords drawn. You can feel the breath of the man beside you, hear his heart pound, smell the blood before it's spilled. The enemy screams, charges, and crashes against your line. The sound is deafening, metal on metal, flesh on blade, the grunt of dying men. You don't see faces, only movement. You stab, block, push forward. You can't think. If you do, you die. Victory doesn't feel like triumph. it feels like survival. When the noise fades and the battlefield falls silent, you stand among bodies, friends and foes alike. The stench of death clings to your armor. You look at your hands, trembling, stained red, and realize that glory is a lie told by those who never fought. For the generals and politicians, your blood is just ink in the pages of history. For you, it's the price of existence. If you're lucky, you'll live to see retirement after 25 years of service. You'll receive a small plot of land and citizenship if you weren't born Roman already. But for many, that promise remains a dream buried under foreign soil. Despite it all, there's pride. The Roman soldier believes he's part of something eternal, an empire that will never fall. You're not just fighting for yourself, but for Rome's name, its laws, its gods. When you march through conquered cities, banners high and drums pounding, you feel invincible. Crowds cheer, and you see awe in their eyes. But deep down, you know the truth. The same empire that praises you today could forget you tomorrow. One defeat, one political change, one emperor's whim, and your entire legion could be erased from memory. Rome remembers its victories, not its soldiers. Still, the brotherhood keeps you going. Around the campfire, men share stories, jokes, and dreams. You hear laughter, rough and tired, but real. You talk about home, about women, about life beyond war. For a moment, the armor feels lighter, the night less cold. Then the horn sounds again, and duty calls. You grab your shield, rise to your feet, and march once more into the unknown. This is what it means to serve Rome, to give everything and expect nothing. The empire demands your sweat, your blood, your soul, and in return, it gives you a place in history's shadow. You might not last a day as a Roman soldier, but those who did, they built a world that still echoes through time. Their discipline became legend, their endurance immortal. But for them, in the mud, under the weight of armor and fear, it was just another day surviving the empire's hunger for power. When the drums of battle faded and the banners were rolled up, the Roman soldiers' true world came alive, not on the battlefield, but inside the sprawling, disciplined heart of the castra, the Roman military camp. From a distance, it looked like an organized city made of leather, wood, and iron. A grid of tents, walls, and trenches built with such precision that every camp across the empire, from Britain's foggy plains to the burning sands of Syria, looked nearly identical. That uniformity was Rome's secret weapon, structure and order that followed its armies wherever they went. The moment the marching stopped for the day, the men dropped their gear and immediately began building their temporary fortress. There were no exceptions, no rest, and no complaints. Each man knew his place, his task, and his rhythm. Trenches were dug for defense, ramparts were raised from the earth, watchtowers were built from logs, and the gateways, the Porta Praetoria and Porta Decumana, were always aligned with the stars, so that the camp itself faced the direction of advance. It was both practical and symbolic, as if even the earth beneath the soldiers' feet obeyed Roman order. Inside this fortress of discipline, life was harsh but strangely comforting. Every man had a role, every movement a purpose. The soldiers slept in groups of 8 in a single leather tent called a contubernium. They ate, joked, trained, and fought together, brothers, not by blood, but by shared suffering. The bond was deeper than friendship. it was survival. In the darkness, when cold winds blew through the camp, they whispered stories of home farms in Gaul, villages in Hispania, or fishing towns along the Italian coast. Some dreamed of retirement, others of glory, but most simply wanted to wake up alive the next day. Their laughter echoed through the rows of tents, mingling with the clang of blacksmiths repairing swords and armor. Fires burned in pits, smoke curling into the night sky as cooks boiled grains and salted meat in iron pots. The smell of sweat, wood smoke, and boiled wheat hung heavy in the air, a scent that every soldier carried home long after war was over. By sunrise, discipline returned with full force. The centurions walked between rows, inspecting armor, checking formations, barking orders with the precision of a heartbeat. To disobey or even hesitate meant punishment, lashes, extra guard duty, or worse. Some centurions were respected, others feared, but all carried the weight of Rome's iron authority. They wore transverse crests on their helmets and carried vine staffs used to enforce discipline. A single strike could silence a complaint, and though many soldiers cursed them under their breath, they also knew that without their leadership, chaos would devour them. The legions thrived on control. That was what separated them from the barbarian hordes they faced. Training was endless, even between wars. Soldiers practiced marching in full armor, sword drills, javelin throws, and formation changes. They built roads, bridges, and even amphitheaters. Rome's army was as much an engineering force as it was a killing machine. When they weren't fighting, they were constructing the empire's arteries, stretching out across continents, all built by the hands of men who could wield both hammer and sword. Every mile of road, every aqueduct and fort bore the invisible fingerprints of soldiers who mixed labor with war. Their sweat became the mortar of Roman civilization. But even inside this rigid structure, life found ways to breathe. Between duties, soldiers gambled with carved dice, carved wooden figurines, and played board games like tabula and ludus latrunculorum. They shared jokes, flirted with local women near towns, and sometimes adopted pets, dogs, monkeys, even birds. Small comforts reminded them they were still human beneath the armor. Letters home were precious, though few could write themselves. A comrade who could read and write was treasured. He became the voice of their longing, penning words for wives, mothers, and children who might never see them again. These letters, written in shaky Latin on papyrus or wax tablets, carried simple truths. I am alive. I think of you. Pray to the gods for my safety. The military camp was also a microcosm of Rome's society. Within the Principia, the headquarters stood the sacred standards, the aquila, or eagle, symbol of the legion's soul. Losing it in battle was the greatest shame imaginable. Every morning, soldiers saluted it as priests performed rituals to bless the army. The Romans believed their victories came not only from strength, but from divine favor. The camp's altar burned incense to Jupiter and Mars, and sacrifices were made before major campaigns. Religion kept fear at bay, giving meaning to the endless wars. Yet beneath this order lay exhaustion. The legions were always moving, always building, always fighting. A soldier's life was a cycle of creation and destruction. One day you built a fort. The next, you burned a village. You could be a hero in the morning and a forgotten corpse by sunset. But even the dead had their place in Rome's design. Bodies were burned beyond the camp, their ashes buried under small stones carved with inscriptions. Here lies a soldier of the empire. No names, no ranks, just a mark of service. To Rome, it didn't matter who you were. What mattered was that you obeyed. In the evenings, the camp transformed. The harsh orders softened into murmurs. Men sat around fires, eating their rationed meals, their armor laid aside. Music filled the air, a soldier's flute, a soft hum, laughter that echoed against the wooden walls. For a few fleeting hours, they became men again, not instruments of conquest. Some carved small wooden figurines for their children. Others mended sandals or cleaned blades. The stars above were the same ones they'd seen back home, but the distance between then and now felt infinite. The night brought both peace and dread. Peace because the day's labor was done, and dread because tomorrow would bring more of the same occasionally. Rumors spread through the camp of rebellion, of a general plotting against the emperor, of barbarians gathering beyond the horizon. The soldiers didn't question politics. They simply waited for orders. Loyalty wasn't to men, but to the eagle, the standard that symbolized the empire's will. And yet, behind their discipline, doubt lingered. Some wondered if the endless wars truly made Rome stronger, or simply fed its hunger for dominance. But such thoughts were dangerous, spoken only in whispers, lost in the crackle of campfires. When the call for night watch came, torches flickered along the palisades. Guards stood alert, eyes scanning the darkness, listening for distant footsteps or rustling leaves. The silence of the night was heavy, the kind that carried both peace and tension. Beyond the walls lay wild lands filled with unseen enemies and the unknown. Inside, the camp pulsed like a living creature, men breathing, dreaming, fearing, and enduring together. The army was a paradox, rigid. It was the embodiment of Rome itself, powerful because it refused to break, even when every man inside it was slowly breaking by dawn. When the horns sounded again, every soldier rose without question. Another march awaited, another battle, another nameless field. And though they might never see the eternal city again, every step they took carved Rome's name deeper into the world. They were the empire's backbone, men of dust and discipline, whose sweat held the empire together. You, a modern observer, might imagine yourself among them, the rhythm of their boots echoing across valleys and plains. But the truth is, few today could endure such a life. No comfort, no rest, no individuality, only duty. That was the price of Rome's greatness. Thousands of men who gave everything so that one name could last forever. When the thunder of marching feet quieted and the endless rhythm of war turned into silence, what remained in a Roman soldier's mind was not triumph, but fatigue, the kind that seeped into the bones and never left. Every victory carved new scars across the soul. To outsiders, the legionaries seemed invincible, a wall of bronze and discipline that conquered nations and tamed continents. But behind that armor lived men haunted by memories they couldn't speak of, the smell of blood after battle, the screams of comrades who fell beside them, the crushing silence after the chaos ended. For centuries, the Roman Empire was built upon their endurance, and yet their inner world was a quiet battlefield of its own. The soldier's heart was trained to obey, not to question. But even the most disciplined mind could not escape the loneliness of the march. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into years, and before a man realized it, he had grown old within the empire's armor, serving causes that shifted with every new emperor. Some began as proud patriots of Rome, believing they were bringing order to the world. By the end, they were ghosts following orders for reasons long forgotten inside the ranks. The morale of the legion was a delicate flame. It flickered between pride and despair, between faith in Rome's destiny and the unbearable grind of endless campaigns. Soldiers sang songs to mask fear, cheered for their generals, and performed rituals before battles to keep fate on their side. When the trumpet called, they locked shields without hesitation, moving as one machine. But when night fell and the fires dimmed, cracks appeared. Doubts crept in quietly about the gods, the glory, and the empire's justice. In the solitude of the watchtower, a man might stare into the dark and wonder if the barbarians were truly his enemies, or simply people defending their homes as he once defended his own. Yet the next dawn erased such thoughts. Rome did not reward doubt. It demanded faith. Faith in victory, in order, in the eternity of its power. And so the soldiers learned to silence the voice inside that questioned until silence itself became their companion. To maintain morale, Rome was clever. Every victory, even small ones, was celebrated with feasts, parades, and rewards. Soldiers received donativa bonus payments in silver or gold, and their generals gave stirring speeches that promised immortality through service. They were told that to die for Rome was to live forever in its memory. Monuments would bear their names. Songs would celebrate their deeds. And for a moment, they believed it. Pride swelled in their chests when they looked upon the eagle's standard glinting in sunlight. They were not mere men. They were Rome's instrument, its beating heart. Yet deep down, each knew the truth. History remembered generals, not foot soldiers. When a legion was lost, it became a number erased from the rolls, its men reduced to ashes beneath nameless soil. The glory promised to them was an illusion, one they accepted willingly, because belief was the only thing that made their suffering endurable. Between wars, the empire gave them other tasks: policing provinces, building fortresses, maintaining order among conquered peoples. But these duties, too, weighed heavily. They were foreigners in foreign lands, often hated by those they ruled. A garrison stationed in Gaul or Judea lived under constant tension. Their presence both maintained peace and provoked resentment. Soldiers learned local tongues, traded with villagers, sometimes fell in love, sometimes fathered children who would never know their fathers' names. Some deserted, unable to bear the endless years of service. Desertion was a crime punishable by death, but for some, death was better than the emptiness of obedience. Those who stayed endured the monotony of routine, drilling under the sun until their skin burned and their spirits dulled. Even leisure carried risk. Gambling debts, brawls, or forbidden affairs could end careers. A Roman soldier's world was surrounded by law, duty, and punishment. Freedom was a distant dream. Psychological burdens grew heavier with every campaign. Ancient texts mention nightmares, visions of slain enemies, of comrades calling from beyond the grave. These were Rome's silent wounds, unspoken yet shared by all. Priests called them signs from the gods, but in truth, they were memories that refused to fade. Still, Rome offered no mercy for weakness. Those who broke under pressure were branded cowards or punished as examples. Stoicism became their shield. Emotionless endurance was the Roman ideal. To feel was to risk disobedience. To question was to invite ruin. So they laughed through pain, sang through exhaustion, and pretended not to see the cruelty that fed the empire's machine. The veterans, men who had survived decades of service, carried both pride and bitterness. When they were finally discharged, they were promised land and pensions, rewards for their loyalty. Some received them, small farms in distant provinces, where they could live out their final days as citizens instead of soldiers. Others found only empty promises, the land already taken by senators and officials. Many drifted into poverty, their armor rusting, their glory forgotten. A few became mercenaries, fighting for whoever would pay. The empire they had served so faithfully often failed them in the end. Still, they spoke of their service with pride, not because of Rome itself, but because of the men who marched beside them. Brotherhood outlasted empire. Within the camp, rituals of remembrance took root. Fallen comrades were honored with simple burials, small altars carved with names, and libations of wine poured into the soil. Superstition was everywhere: amulets, prayers, lucky charms. Soldiers believed that wearing a piece of iron ore, whispering a dead man's name before battle, could ward off death. In truth, these small acts were not about magic, but about memory, ways to humanize the inhuman life they led. Every Roman soldier carried ghosts within him, and rituals helped keep those ghosts at peace. As the empire expanded, the burden on its legions grew. They were stretched thin across vast borders, from the deserts of Egypt to the frozen rivers of Germania. Some fought far from home for decades, defending lands they would never truly understand. The further Rome spread, the less Roman its soldiers became. Germans, Spaniards, Syrians, Africans all wore the same armor, spoke Latin commands, and called themselves Romans. The army became a melting pot of cultures, united not by birthplace but by discipline. Rome's strength was no longer its people, but its system, a machine so vast that individuals disappeared inside it. To live a single day as a Roman soldier was to walk the edge between glory and oblivion. Each morning could be your last, each sunset your salvation. Food was rationed, sleep was brief, and comfort was a luxury. Yet even in such harshness, they found meaning. To serve Rome was to be part of something eternal, a force that built roads, cities, and laws that still shape our world today. The soldier's suffering was not in vain. It forged the foundation of civilization. But for those who lived it, the weight was unbearable. They were the invisible builders of history, the forgotten laborers of an immortal empire. If you, a modern dreamer, imagine stepping into their sandals, feel the grit of dust in your throat, the burn of the armor on your shoulders, the relentless sun over your helmet, you would last perhaps an hour before collapsing. No comforts, no softness, no pause, just endless obedience. That was the true face of the Roman army, not glorious parades or marble statues, but the quiet agony of endurance. And when sleep came, it came like mercy, deep, heavy, dreamless. Tomorrow would bring another march, another order, another sunrise over an empire that never slept. And the soldier, weary but unbroken, would rise once more because Rome demanded it. If you were to open your eyes in the middle of Rome, at the height of its power, the first thing you would notice wouldn't be the marble or the monuments. It would be the noise. Rome was alive, breathing, groaning, shouting. It was not a quiet city of philosophers and poets, as the marble statues suggest. It was a restless beast made of stone, smoke, and sweat. Imagine the sun just rising over the rooftops, its golden light glancing off tiled domes and narrow alleys already crowded with life. The air is thick with the smell of bread baking, meat roasting, manure drying, and incense burning from temple altars. Street vendors shout their prices in Latin and Greek, arguing with housewives, bargaining for olives, fish, or figs. The cobblestones are wet from the morning's cleaning slaves, throwing buckets of water into the gutters, sweeping away the filth that gathered overnight. Somewhere, a cartwheel creaks as donkeys pull heavy loads of wine amphorae toward the market. Above the din, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer rings out, a heartbeat of iron that echoes through the district. This was the real Rome, not the glory of the Senate or the speeches of emperors, but the endless hum of humanity. In a city of over 1 million souls, life was a constant negotiation of space and survival. The rich lived in airy villas on the hills, the Palatine, the Aventine, where fountains whispered and gardens bloomed. But the vast majority lived in insulae, tall, fragile apartment buildings stacked like honeycomb. They leaned dangerously over the streets, built of wood and brick that could crumble or catch fire at any moment. Families squeezed into single rooms, sharing walls so thin you could hear your neighbors' arguments or laughter. Water was scarce, fire constant, and privacy non-existent. To live in Rome was to live pressed against strangers, breathing the same dust, sweating in the same heat. Yet no one complained, because this was the center of the world. Every road led here. Every merchant dreamed of trading here. Every slave longed to buy freedom here. The morning belonged to work. Bakers rose before dawn, their faces glowing red from the ovens. Merchants filled the forum, displaying goods from across the empire: Egyptian linen, Greek pottery, Syrian spices, British tin. The chatter of dozens of languages blended into a single roar. Rome was not merely a city, it was the world condensed into stone. Senators arrived in their litters, carried by slaves, their white togas trailing dust as they ascended the marble steps of the Curia. They discussed laws and taxes, but their real business was power, alliances, favors, bribes, whispered in the shadows. Meanwhile, in the streets, philosophers debated beside beggars, poets recited verses for coins, and thieves prowled like cats through the crowd. The contrast was dizzying. Wealth and misery intertwined so tightly that one could not exist without the other. By midday, the city burned with heat. Shade became a currency. People crowded under porticos and temple arches, wiping sweat from their brows. Water sellers shouted aqua, aqua frigida, and children chased each other between the columns of the forum. The smell of food drifted through the air: roasted chickpeas, honeyed pastries, garum, the fermented fish sauce Romans adored and foreigners despised. Nearby, in the public baths, men of all classes gathered to wash, gossip, and discuss politics. The Thermae were Rome's social heart, vast complexes with hot rooms, cold plunges, gymnasiums, and gardens. Here, senators might bathe beside soldiers, poets beside merchants. The walls were painted with gods and heroes, the air thick with steam and laughter. To a modern visitor, it would seem luxurious. To a Roman, it was simply routine. Cleanliness was not just hygiene, it was identity, a symbol of being civilized. But for all its grandeur, Rome was a dangerous city. Fires broke out constantly, spreading through wooden roofs faster than soldiers could respond. Thieves and gangs ruled the narrow alleys at night, and the poor often starved when grain shipments from Egypt were delayed. Diseases thrived in the crowded streets, carried by rats and stagnant water. The empire's wealth flowed through Rome, but it rarely stayed with the people who needed it most. Gladiatorial games offered a cruel kind of escape, blood for entertainment, death for distraction. In the Colosseum, 50,000 spectators screamed as men fought beasts or each other, their fates decided by a thumb's movement. The emperor sat above, a god among mortals, while the crowd below forgot their hunger for a few glorious moments. It was brutal, but it worked. Bread and spectacle, that was how Rome kept peace among its restless millions. As evening fell, the city softened. The setting sun painted the Tiber River gold, and the hum of daytime turned into the murmur of night. Lamps flickered along the streets, filled with olive oil and smoke. Taverns came alive with laughter, music, and the smell of cheap wine. Soldiers off duty boasted about battles, sailors sang of distant ports, and lovers met in secret beneath balconies draped with vines. Storytellers recounted myths of Jupiter and Venus, while gamblers rolled dice on worn wooden tables. The city was both beautiful and exhausting, too alive to sleep, too vast to ever be silent. And somewhere in the chaos, a philosopher sat by the river, writing words that would outlast empires. All things fade, but the soul endures. To live in Rome for one day was to witness the entire spectrum of human existence: glory, greed, faith, fear, joy, and despair, all crowded within the same walls. It was a place where emperors commanded armies and slaves swept their marble floors, where poets dreamed of eternity and beggars dreamed of bread. Every stone, every whisper, every shadow carried the weight of history. You could not walk a street without feeling the ghosts of the past soldiers who marched home from conquest, lovers who met under moonlight, children who grew old before their time. It was a city that devoured and inspired in equal measure. And as the stars emerged above its domes, you would understand why Rome never truly died. It lived on in the memory of those who endured it, because to survive even one day in that magnificent chaos was to be part of something eternal. If you thought the heart of Rome beat in the Senate or the palaces of emperors, you would be wrong. It beat in the arenas, the theaters, and the temples where gods and men met in spectacle. The empire was a master of control, and it ruled not only through legions and laws, but through emotion, pleasure, awe, and fear. To understand how Rome survived for so long, you must understand what kept its people loyal, what filled their days and dreams, entertainment and faith. These two forces, one feeding the body's hunger, the other the soul's, were the true foundations of the empire. They were what made the poor forget their misery and the rich believe they were divine. At the center of this intoxicating world stood the Colosseum, the grandest theater of blood ever built by human hands. Its stone arches rose like the ribs of a god, casting shadows over the city's heart. On a bright morning, crowds poured through its gates, citizens in togas, slaves carrying food and cushions, noblewomen hiding behind veils, even children clutching wooden tokens for entry. The noise was deafening, a living wave of voices echoing through marble corridors. Vendors sold bread, wine, and roasted nuts as the crowd found their seats. Beneath them, in the darkness of the hypogeum, hundreds of men and beasts waited, gladiators sharpening swords, lions pacing in cages, stagehands preparing the deadly machinery that made the arena come alive. And when the emperor entered, the crowd rose like thunder, trumpets blared. The games began. The first spectacle was not battle, but beauty. Exotic animals from across the empire, elephants from Africa, tigers from Persia, crocodiles from the Nile, were paraded through the arena, symbols of Rome's power over nature. The people gasped, clapped, and cheered, not realizing the cruelty behind the wonder. Soon after, the hunts began. Trained hunters, known as venatores, fought wild beasts with spears and nets, their survival depending on speed and spectacle. Blood stained the sand, but the crowd shouted for more. For them, it was not death, it was art, and when the gladiators appeared, silence fell. These were not mere fighters. They were celebrities, heroes, and sacrifices all at once. Some were slaves, others volunteers seeking fame or redemption. Each carried a distinct weapon and fighting style. The resiarius with his net and trident, the secutor with sword and shield, the murmillo with heavy armor. The match began with ceremony, music swelling as the two men circled each other, every movement calculated to ignite emotion. The clash of steel echoed like thunder, and when one fell, the victor raised his eyes to the emperor. A hand gesture, thumb up or down, decided the man's fate. The crowd held its breath. When death came, it came swiftly, efficiently. And then the sand was raked clean, as if life could be erased by order. Why such obsession with blood? To modern eyes, it seems barbaric, but to the Romans, it was sacred. The arena was not merely entertainment, it was ritual. It reminded them that life was fleeting, that courage and strength were virtues worth dying for. Death was public, but dignity was private. A gladiator who faced death without fear won the admiration of the crowd, even if he fell. This was the Roman ideal: discipline in life, composure in death. In the empire's philosophy, to die bravely was to live forever. The games were also political theater. Emperors used them to display generosity and control. A grand spectacle could erase months of anger or hunger among the people. Give them bread and circuses, one poet wrote, and that was exactly what Rome did. Feed the body, dazzle the eyes, and silence the soul. But the arena was not the only stage for Rome's passions. The theaters of the city echoed with laughter, music, and drama. Actors in masks performed comedies, mocking senators, and tragedies, retelling the myths of gods and heroes. Crowds laughed loudly, wept loudly, and threw fruit if bored. Rome's love for performance mirrored its love for spectacle. It was a society obsessed with watching and being watched. Even the streets were stages. Victorious generals paraded through the city in triumphs, processions. so magnificent they blurred the line between human and divine. Chariots glittered with gold, soldiers marched with captured prisoners and treasures, and the general rode behind, crowned with laurel, basking in applause. Yet behind the smile, he held a secret reminder of mortality, a slave whispering in his ear, "Remember, you are only a man." Rome never let its heroes forget their fragility, even in their glory. And then there was faith, the other half of the Roman soul. Religion in Rome was not a matter of belief, but of duty. The gods were everywhere, in rivers, doors, fire, and sky. Every household had its Lares and Penates, guardian spirits of home and family. Farmers prayed to Ceres for grain, sailors to Neptune for calm seas, soldiers to Mars for victory. The emperor himself was worshipped as divine, his statues kissed and crowned with flowers. To the Romans, piety meant respect, to perform the correct ritual at the correct time, to keep harmony between gods and men. Temples were not places of worship in the modern sense. They were offices of divine administration, where priests ensured that Rome's spiritual contracts were properly maintained. As long as the gods were honored, the empire prospered. Yet beneath this official religion, something was changing. As the empire grew, it absorbed new gods and ideas, Egyptian, Greek, Persian. The cult of Isis promised comfort to the sorrowful. Mithras offered brotherhood and salvation to soldiers. People longed for something deeper than ceremony, for faith that touched the heart, not just the calendar. And then came whispers of a new sect, followers of a crucified man from Judea, preaching love and equality. To Rome, it seemed harmless at first, even foolish, but quietly it spread from slaves to merchants, from streets to palaces. Christianity would one day challenge everything Rome stood for, but in this golden age, few could imagine that the empires would one day bow before a carpenter's faith. As dusk fell over the city after a day of games and prayers, Rome exhaled. Fires burned in temples, music drifted from taverns, and families gathered for simple meals. Children played with clay toys shaped like gladiators, while old men recited stories of the gods. The same people who had cheered for blood now knelt before altars, their hands raised in devotion. This was the duality of Rome, savage and spiritual, violent and visionary. It conquered the world not only with swords, but with stories, rituals, and dreams. And as the stars appeared above its domes, flickering like the eyes of forgotten gods, the people of Rome slept in the warmth of their city's heartbeat, a heartbeat that, even centuries later, still echoes in the ruins. If you were there, sitting high in the Colosseum as the moon rose over the arena, you might feel something strange, not horror, but awe. You would sense the weight of history pressing on your chest, the realization that everything humanity has ever loved or feared was once played out here beneath the gaze of thousands. The blood, the cheers, the prayers, all fading now into dust, yet still alive in the stones. You might close your eyes and hear the faint echo of a crowd, and understand why Rome, for all its flaws, could never be forgotten. For it was not just a city. It was a mirror of ourselves, our hunger for meaning, our thirst for spectacle, our endless struggle between cruelty and beauty. When you think of Rome's greatness, you might picture emperors, armies, or marble statues, but the true miracle of the Roman Empire wasn't its wars or its wealth. It was its ability to build. The Romans didn't just conquer land, they reshaped it. They carved mountains, bridged rivers, moved seas, and tamed nature itself. Every city, road, and aqueduct was an act of defiance against the limits of the world. It is said that Rome was built on 7 hills, but in truth, it stood upon the shoulders of 1 million nameless laborers, slaves, soldiers, and engineers whose hands turned dreams into stone. Their legacy is not written in words, but in walls that still stand 2,000 years later. To live in ancient Rome was to walk among wonders so vast and precise that even today they defy comprehension. The day began with the hum of industry. Builders marched through the streets carrying tools, iron chisels, bronze hammers, ropes, and plumb lines. The sound of stone meeting stone was the rhythm of the city. Dust filled the air as men climbed scaffolds, calling orders in Latin that echoed between the arches. Construction was everywhere, temples rising to new gods, baths expanding to hold thousands, roads stretching endlessly toward the horizon. The Romans believed that to build was to rule. Each brick laid was another declaration of dominance over time itself. Even the emperors understood this. Julius, Caesar, Augustus, Trajan, Hadrian, each tried to outbuild the last, leaving behind monuments that proclaimed not just their power, but their immortality. Augustus famously boasted that he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. He wasn't exaggerating. One of Rome's most astonishing achievements was its mastery over water. The aqueducts, those graceful bridges of stone arches, carried pure water from distant springs into the heart of the city. Some stretched for miles across valleys and hills, using nothing but gravity to maintain flow. The engineering was so precise that the gradient of decline, just a few centimeters per 100 meters, never faltered. Inside Rome, water gushed from public fountains, filled baths, and cooled gardens. Citizens could bathe, drink, and cook without thinking of scarcity. Water was civilization itself, and Rome had tamed it. In the Thermae of Caracalla and Diocletian, tens of thousands bathed daily in pools of hot and cold water, beneath vaulted ceilings decorated with mosaics and marble columns. Steam rose like incense, turning cleanliness into ceremony. Even the poor, who lived in cramped apartments, could visit these grand baths for a single coin, a luxury unmatched for centuries. And then there were the roads, the arteries of the empire. Straight, solid, and eternal, they connected every corner of Rome's dominion. From Britannia's misty forests to the deserts of Arabia, built in layers of stone, gravel, and sand, these roads were so well constructed that many still exist today. Soldiers marched on them, merchants carried their goods, and messages of war and peace traveled faster than ever before. The phrase, "all roads lead to Rome," was not a metaphor, it was a fact. At the center of the forum stood the Millenarium Aureum, the golden milestone, marking the point from which all Roman distances were measured. It symbolized Rome's centrality, not just geographically, but spiritually. Every step taken on Roman soil, no matter how distant, was a step toward the heart of civilization. The Romans also mastered architecture in ways the world had never seen. They were the first to truly understand concrete, a mixture of volcanic ash, lime, and water that could harden underwater and last for centuries. With it, they created forms previously impossible, massive domes, arches, and vaults that defied gravity. The Pantheon, built under Emperor Hadrian, remains one of the most perfect structures ever made. A dome so vast and balanced that its exact method of construction still puzzles engineers today. Light pours through its open oculus like a divine spotlight, illuminating the marble floor where emperors, generals, and ordinary citizens once walked. When rain falls, it drifts through the oculus and disappears into tiny drains in the floor. A simple yet breathtaking example of Roman precision. To stand inside the Pantheon is to feel eternity itself, captured in stone. Fire, however, was the empire's greatest enemy. In a city built of wood and crowded with life, flames could devour whole districts overnight. The Great Fire of 64 CE nearly destroyed Rome, its orange glow lighting the night sky for miles. Temples, markets, homes, all fell to ash. The Emperor Nero seized the moment to rebuild on a grander scale, widening streets, creating fire-resistant zones, and erecting his infamous Domus Aurea, the golden house covered in gold leaf, marble, and precious gems. It was a palace of obscene luxury, complete with artificial lakes and rotating dining rooms. The people despised its extravagance, yet it set a new standard for architectural ambition. From its ashes, Rome rose again, stronger, more beautiful, more eternal. Yet behind this magnificence was endless labor. Thousands of slaves and soldiers worked in unbearable heat, breaking stone, mixing mortar, hauling marble. Their sweat built the empire, but their names were forgotten. Engineers like Vitruvius designed wonders that defied nature, but it was anonymous hands that lifted every block. The city's constant hum of creation was both inspiring and tragic, a reminder that progress always came at a human cost. And yet, in a strange way, it gave purpose to all who lived within it. In Rome, to work was to belong to something greater than oneself. Even the lowest slave, building a bath or paving a road, could look at his work and know it would outlive him. That knowledge was its own kind of immortality at night. When torches flickered along the aqueducts and the moonlight glowed on marble, Rome seemed almost alive. The fountains murmured softly, streets glistened after the day's labor, and distant hammering echoed from workshops that never slept. The city was not static. It breathed, grew, and evolved. Every generation added something: a temple here, a column there, a bridge across a river. And every addition carried whispers of ambition and defiance. The Romans knew their empire would one day fade, as all things do, but they built as if it never would. Their monuments were prayers made of stone, prayers to time itself. If you were to stand in the Forum at midnight, surrounded by marble pillars and broken statues, you would feel it, the pulse of genius that still lingers. The same minds that charted stars, healed wounds, and mapped continents once walked these streets. Their inventions, aqueducts, sewers, domes, concrete, became the backbone of modern civilization. The modern world is merely Rome's reflection, polished by centuries, but rooted in the same dream to shape the world and leave a mark that endures. The Romans achieved that dream. Long after their legions vanished, their roads still guide travelers, their bridges still span rivers, and their cities still whisper their name. You might close your eyes and imagine yourself there, feeling the stone beneath your fingers, warm from the day's sun, smooth from centuries of touch. You would hear the trickle of water from a fountain fed by aqueducts built before Christ. Smell the faint scent of wet limestone and olive oil from nearby lamps, and realize that everything around you was built with one purpose: to last. That was Rome's secret: permanence through precision, eternity through effort. The empire fell, the emperors died, but the stones remained. And in those stones, the heartbeat of Rome still echoes, steady, unyielding, immortal. If there is one place that captures the heart of ancient Rome's contradictions, its beauty and brutality, its grandeur and savagery, it is the Colosseum. Imagine it, dawn breaking over the city, the pale light spilling across marble temples and tiled roofs as thousands of people surge toward the great amphitheater. Its towering arches glow gold in the morning sun, banners fluttering in the warm breeze, while the air vibrates with anticipation. Men, women, and children crowd the entrances, their sandals scraping stone, their voices blending into a roar that rises like thunder. They come not for worship or wisdom, but for spectacle, for blood, courage, and death. The Colosseum, or Flavian Amphitheater, was more than a building. It was the beating heart of Rome's obsession with power. It could hold 50,000 people, more than many cities of the time, built under the emperors Vespasian and Titus. It was a statement to the world: Rome rules not just with the sword, but with the show. The scale of it was staggering. From a distance, the Colosseum looked like a mountain of stone and arches rising from the earth itself. Its outer walls soared to nearly 50 meters, ringed with statues and adorned with marble. Inside, the tiers of seating curved upward in perfect symmetry. Divided by class, the closer you sat to the arena, the higher your status. Senators lounged in marble seats, nobles reclined under awnings to block the sun, while common citizens filled the middle rows, and slaves and women crowded the highest tiers. Every seat had a view of the stage where life and death unfolded. Beneath the arena floor lay a labyrinth of tunnels, cages, and pulleys, the hypogeum where animals were kept, gladiators waited, and stage machinery creaked like some monstrous heartbeat. Lions from Africa, tigers from Asia, crocodiles from the Nile, bears from the Alps, all caged below, restless and hungry, waiting for their turn in the grand performance. The games began with ceremony. Trumpets blared, horns echoed, and the emperor himself appeared in his gilded box, surrounded by guards and senators. When he raised his hand, silence fell over the crowd, 50,000 breaths held as one. Then came the opening act, a parade of gladiators marching in formation. Bronze helmets gleaming, shields polished, muscles taut with tension. They saluted the emperor and shouted the famous words, Ave Caesar, morituri, te salute. Hail, Caesar, those who are about to die salute you. The crowd erupted, their cheers shaking the stone beneath their feet. To the Romans, this was not cruelty. It was entertainment, a celebration of strength, discipline, and courage. To live was to fight, and to die well was an honor. The first matches were often venations, animal hunts. Gates opened, and beasts burst into the arena, snarling, roaring, or slithering through the sand. Hunters armed with spears and nets faced them with practiced precision. A man might face a lion leaping from the shadows, or a charging bull with flaming horns. The audience gasped and shouted, delighting in the spectacle. Exotic animals symbolized the reach of the empire, proof that Rome could command nature itself. Sometimes the beasts won, sometimes they fell, but either way, the crowd was fed its share of adrenaline and awe. As the sun climbed higher, the smell of sweat, blood, and dust filled the air, thick and intoxicating. Vendors moved through the stands, selling bread, olives, and wine, their voices cutting through the chaos. Children laughed, gamblers argued, and the great machine of entertainment ground on. Then came the gladiators, the stars of the show. They were slaves, prisoners, or volunteers who sought glory and freedom through combat. Some were criminals condemned to die. Others were trained professionals who had dedicated their lives to the arena. They fought under different classes: murmillos with heavy shields and short swords, retieri with nets and tridents, secutors with helmets shaped to protect against spears. Their armor gleamed in the sun, painted with vivid colors and symbols. Before each match, the editor, the sponsor of the games, announced the fighters, their records, and sometimes their origins. The crowd had favorites, cheering names they knew from past victories. Betting was common, and fortunes were won and lost on a single strike. When the combat began, the sound of metal on metal rang like music. Swords clashed, shields splintered, and sand turned dark underfoot. The fighters moved with speed and precision, trained athletes performing deadly choreography. Every move drew a reaction from the audience. A cheer for a near miss, a groan for a stumble, a collective gasp when blood was drawn. The Romans loved skill as much as violence. A clever feint or a graceful dodge could earn applause even from the upper tiers. The emperor watched closely, his expression unreadable. When one gladiator fell, wounded and beaten, the victor raised his weapon toward the imperial box. The crowd roared, chanting as they pointed their thumbs, the ancient polis verso, to decide the loser's fate. If mercy was granted, the defeated man lived to fight another day. If not, the victor delivered the final blow, swift and merciless. The body was dragged away, the sand raked clean, and the next pair entered. The games continued, hour after hour, until the sun sank low and the air shimmered with heat and dust. But behind the grandeur lay horror. Beneath the arena, the corridors stank of blood and fear. Slaves hauled carcasses, washed weapons, and prepared the next victims. Some gladiators prayed to forgotten gods, others sat in silence, sharpening their blades, knowing they might not see another sunrise. The noise above the cheering, the music, the chants reached them like echoes from another world. To them, it was not glory, but survival. Yet, there was pride, too. Gladiators were celebrities of their time. Their faces appeared on pottery, graffiti praised their skill, and women whispered their names like forbidden prayers. Some even achieved freedom through victory, earning wooden swords, rudies, that symbolized their release. For a few, death in the arena meant eternal fame. The Colosseum was more than entertainment. It was propaganda. It reminded citizens of Rome's power, its ability to decide who lived and who died. The emperors used the games to win favor, distract from politics, and display generosity. Admission was free, the food was abundant, and the spectacle unmatched. bread and circuses, panem et circenses. That was how emperors kept the people content. The masses didn't care who ruled, as long as they were fed and entertained. And so, the blood kept flowing, the crowds kept cheering, and the empire's shadow grew longer. As evening descended, torches lit the arena in a warm orange glow. The last matches were fought under flickering flames, shadows dancing across the sand. The smell of oil and smoke mixed with the metallic Thames of blood. Musicians played flutes and drums, their rhythms echoing like heartbeats. When the final victor raised his weapon under the dying light, the crowd rose in thunderous applause. The emperor stood, raised his hand, and the games were declared over. The people streamed out into the streets, their voices still buzzing with excitement, as the Colosseum fell silent again. Only the slaves and animals remained below, cleaning the mess, preparing for another day. To stand there now, centuries later, is to feel ghosts in the air. The broken arches, the crumbling walls, the sand-covered floor, they whisper of all that passed here, the laughter, the screams, the glory, and the grief. The Colosseum is both a monument and a tomb, a reminder of what humans will do for spectacle, for pride, for the illusion of control. The Romans built it to last forever, and in a way it has, not as a place of entertainment, but as a mirror. To look upon its ruins is to see ourselves reflected, our hunger for drama, our fascination with violence, our endless chase for meaning in chaos. The Colosseum stands not only as a relic of Rome's past, but as a warning of our own. When the last roar faded from the stands and the emperor's procession vanished into the streets of marble and torchlight, the Colosseum did not rest. It breathed a different kind of life, quieter, darker, heavier. The crowd's laughter and the music's echo hung above like ghosts, while below the arena, in the maze of tunnels and cages, reality waited. Down there, the heat of the day clung to the stone, the air thick with the scent of blood and iron. Slaves worked silently, dragging carcasses of beasts and men alike toward the refuse pits. The wooden lifts that had once raised lions and tigers into sunlight now groaned under the weight of death. Returning to the underworld, lanterns flickered along the walls, their light trembling on rough stone and wet sand. Every inch of the hypogeum whispered of violence, chains rattling faintly, water dripping from the ceilings, and somewhere the low growl of an animal that had survived the day's slaughter. The games above might have been theater, but below the stage was truth in the holding cells. The surviving gladiators sat slumped against the walls, too exhausted to speak. Their armor was dented, their skin torn, their eyes hollow from the day's spectacle. For them, the cheers of 50,000 meant nothing now. They had heard it all before. They knew the fickleness of the crowd. The same people who cheered their victories would forget their names tomorrow, cheering someone else into legend. A few men whispered prayers to Mars, the god of war, or to Nemesis, goddess of fate. Others just stared at the ground, lost in the rhythm of their own heartbeat. Each one lived on borrowed time. Some had survived a dozen fights. Others were newcomers who had barely learned to hold a sword. All shared the same truth. The Colosseum was both home and grave. A medicus, one of the arena's physicians, moved among them, his robes stained dark with blood. He carried a box of bandages, herbs, and crude tools. His hands were steady but tired. He had seen more men die than he could count. He knelt beside a wounded fighter whose leg was split open from knee to shin, and without ceremony poured wine over the wound to clean it. The man screamed once, then bit his fist to muffle it. The medicus stitched the flesh quickly, whispering something meant to be comforting, though it sounded like a farewell. Around them, the moans of the injured mingled with the distant scraping of shovels. Every sound was a reminder that glory always demanded a price in another corner. Slaves cleaned the armor, polishing the dents, scrubbing the stains, preparing them for the next day's spectacle. There was no rest for them either. For every drop of blood spilled in the sand, a dozen unseen hands worked to make the arena shine again by morning. They repaired nets, sharpened tridents, and replaced broken spears. The smell of oil and sweat filled the corridors. One boy, barely 12, dragged a helmet twice his size toward the armory, his bare feet slipping on the stone. He had never seen the arena from above, only from beneath, where heroes were built and broken. For him, the Colosseum was a monster that devoured men and asked for more. The bodies of the fallen were treated differently, depending on who they were. Those who had died with courage and skill might be granted a brief moment of honor, their names recorded, their weapons displayed. Sometimes their fellow fighters carried them out under torchlight, a silent procession through the tunnels. But most were anonymous, dumped into carts bound for the city's outskirts. Their corpses were burned or thrown into pits outside the walls, mingled with the carcasses of beasts. No family mourned them, no monuments bore their names. The sand that had soaked their blood was raked smooth again, as if they had never existed. By dawn, the arena would look pristine, a clean canvas for new deaths. That was Rome's way, life renewed through oblivion. Above ground, the city celebrated. The streets buzzed with wine and song as citizens recounted the day's battles. Did you see the Thracians strike? Did you hear the lion roar? The brutality became legend before the blood had dried. In taverns and baths, the games were all anyone talked about. Merchants sold figurines of popular fighters. Children reenacted their duels with wooden sticks, and poets turned their victories into verses. Glory was a product, mass-produced and consumed by a society addicted to spectacle. Even the emperor's name echoed through the conversations: magnanimous, merciful, divine. Bread and circuses kept the empire's heart beating, even as its soul eroded. Yet, for some Romans, the illusion cracked. Philosophers whispered that the games were a moral disease, a symptom of decay. Seneca had once written that watching death for pleasure corrupted the mind. Christians, still persecuted in the empire's shadow, condemned the arena outright, calling it an altar to false gods. Some refused to attend, others secretly helped wounded gladiators escape. Their defiance was small, almost invisible, but it grew. In time, centuries later, when Christianity triumphed and emperors bent the knee to the cross, the games would end, not with protest, but with quiet exhaustion. But on nights like this, under the empire's blazing glory, that end felt impossible. Rome seemed eternal, and its thirst unquenchable. The most haunting sound in the Colosseum after dark was the wind. It whistled through the corridors, weaving between cages and columns, stirring the sand into faint patterns. Some said it carried voices, echoes of the slain, whispering through time. Guards stationed near the entrances claimed to hear them, the faint clash of swords, the gasp of a dying man, the cheer of a long-gone crowd. Maybe it was imagination, or maybe stone remembers. The Colosseum had absorbed too much life to ever be silent again. Its walls, cracked and worn, still pulsed with invisible memory. Even now, centuries later, visitors who stand in its ruins say they can feel it, that strange hum of history vibrating through the ground as the moon climbed high over the city. The last lanterns flickered out. The slaves slept where they worked, curled beside empty cages. The surviving gladiators dreamed restless dreams of freedom, of past lives, of open fields they'd never see again. Somewhere far above, in the emperor's palace, feasts continued, laughter echoed, and plans were made for the next day's entertainment. Rome never stopped. The empire's heart beat on, fueled by ambition, cruelty, and the unshakable belief that it could command the world forever. But under that grandeur, in the depths of the Colosseum, another truth whispered, one that history would never forget, that every empire, no matter how mighty, builds its glory on the bones of the forgotten. For nearly 4 centuries, the Colosseum had been the heartbeat of Rome, a living monument to its glory, cruelty, and unmatched thirst for spectacle. But even the strongest hearts eventually falter. The empire that had once stretched from the misty shores of Britannia to the burning sands of Africa began to crumble, not from enemies outside, but from rot within. By the 3rd century, Rome's streets were quieter after the games. The cheers grew fainter, the crowds thinner. The same empire that had built roads to the ends of the earth could no longer mend the cracks in its own walls. And yet, the Colosseum still stood, waiting for its next show, its arches like open mouths hungry for noise. The senators still sat in their marble seats, though fewer each year. The emperors still smiled from gilded boxers, though their reigns were shorter and bloodier. The empire had changed, but the arena had not, and that, perhaps, was its tragedy. The decline did not come all at once. It crept in like rust. The economy faltered. The legions, once invincible, were stretched thin across endless borders. Plagues swept through the cities, killing thousands. Food grew scarce, and riots erupted. The cost of maintaining the games, the animals, the armor, the grand processions became staggering. Once, the emperor could import lions from Numidia, elephants from Carthage, and leopards from Syria. Now the ships came slower, or not at all. What beasts remained were smaller, weaker, sometimes half-starved. The games began to lose their luster. Citizens who had once watched lions tear men apart now muttered that the thrill was gone. The spectacle that once united the empire was becoming a hollow ritual, one that no longer hid the cracks spreading through the Roman world. Then came Christianity, rising quietly from the shadows of persecution. For centuries, followers of the new faith had been the empire's scapegoats, burned, beaten, and thrown to the beasts in the very arena that now stood as their greatest symbol of suffering. But as emperors fell and philosophies shifted, something changed. Christian ideas began to reach the ears of Rome's rulers, whispering of compassion, mercy, and the sanctity of life. To those who had known only blood and dominance, it was a strange new song, one that promised redemption over conquest. Slowly, the empire's heart began to turn. When Emperor Constantine embraced Christianity in the early 4th century, the tide was irreversible. The gods of old Mars, Jupiter, Venus faded into myth, their temples emptying of priests and prayers. The games, once divine offerings, now seemed barbaric in a world that worshipped forgiveness. Still, Rome did not give them up easily. The Colosseum remained open, its stones steeped in habit. The people still came, though now their cheers were tinged with guilt. The emperors, uncertain of the new faith's grip, continued to fund spectacles to keep order. Give them bread and circuses. The old proverb went panem et circenses, and for a while longer it worked. But something had changed in the eyes of the spectators. When a man fell bleeding in the sand, fewer shouted for death. Some turned away, some wept, and others prayed quietly under their breath, crossing themselves where the old gods' altars once stood. The spirit of Rome was shifting, and the Colosseum, once its proudest symbol, was becoming its shadow. By the time of Emperor Honorius, in the early 5th century, the games were a ghost of their former glory. The empire itself was collapsing, divided between East and West, torn by war and invasion. Barbarians pressed against the borders, and the treasury was empty. The Colosseum, that mighty heart of marble and blood, beat slower and slower. Fewer gladiators fought. Many schools closed. The exotic beasts that had once roared in its pits were now extinct or too costly to capture. The vast machinery beneath the arena lay silent, its gears rusting, its pulleys sagging with age. The arena floor, once alive with sound and motion, became a graveyard of memories. Legend tells of one final spark, one last act of defiance before the lights went out forever. In 404 CE, during a festival celebrating the emperor's victory, the games resumed for what was to be one of the last times. The stands filled, though not as full as in the old days. Gladiators fought as they always had, and the crowd cheered out of nostalgia, perhaps more than excitement. Among the spectators was a Christian monk named Telemachus. Horrified by the violence, he leaped into the arena, shouting for the emperor to stop the bloodshed. At first, the crowd was confused, then furious. Stones were thrown, and Telemachus fell, beaten to death, where so many others had fallen before him. But his act did not vanish into silence. The emperor, moved by the monk's courage, issued an edict soon after, forbidding gladiatorial combat across the empire. And just like that, 1,000 years of blood and sand came to an end, not with a roar, but with a whisper. The Colosseum did not die that day, but it fell into slumber. The arena grew quiet, the seats gathered dust. Weeds sprouted between the cracks of marble, and wildflowers bloomed where men had once killed and died. The tunnels below flooded with rainwater, turning into dark pools where frogs croaked and snakes coiled. Birds nested in the arches, their songs replacing the screams that once filled the air. The great structure remained scarred, hollow, but enduring. Earthquakes would later tear at its bones. Scavengers would steal its stones to build churches and palaces. Yet the Colosseum refused to vanish. Even in ruin, it stood as a memory carved in stone, not of power, but of humanity's endless hunger for it. And so the world moved on. The empire fell, the emperors faded, but the Colosseum remained a ghost of an age when glory and death walked hand in hand. Centuries later, Pilgrims from distant lands would stand within its broken walls and feel the weight of history pressing down on them. Artists would paint it under moonlight, poets would write of its silence, and travelers would whisper that if you closed your eyes, you could still hear the crowd. Today, it stands surrounded by traffic and tourists, its once red sands replaced by pathways and flowers. But if you stand in its center at dusk, when the sun bleeds gold across its arches, you might still feel that ancient heartbeat, faint but steady, the rhythm of a civilization that built wonders and buried its conscience beneath them. The Colosseum's story is not one of cruelty alone. It is the story of transformation. What was once a monument to violence became a monument to endurance, proof that even the darkest places can outlive the darkness. Its stones remind us that humanity has always balanced between creation and destruction, art and atrocity. Rome's greatest stage taught the world not only how to entertain, but how to endure. And perhaps that is why, after all these centuries, we still gaze upon its ruins with awe. Because somewhere within those arches, beneath the cracks and vines, lies a question that has never changed. What are we willing to build, and what are we willing to destroy in the name of greatness? The fall of Rome was not an explosion, but a sigh, a slow unraveling of the threads that had once held the world together. To those who lived through it, there was no single day when the empire ended, no trumpet blast, no final decree, only the gradual fading of certainty, like the dimming of a great fire that had burned too long. For centuries, the Romans had believed their city was eternal, Roma Eterna, built by gods, destined to outlast time itself. And yet, by the 5th century, the eternal city trembled. Its marble temples were crumbling, its fountains dry, its legions gone. The same streets that had once echoed with triumphal marches now lay silent, filled instead with whispers of ghosts and the distant clatter of hooves as foreign soldiers rode through gates once guarded by Roman steel. The empire that had conquered the world had finally been conquered by its own weight. But endings are never simple. When the Western Empire fell in 476 CE, struck down not by armies alone, but by exhaustion, corruption, and decay, it did not vanish, it transformed. The Emperor Romulus Augustulus, a boy barely 16, was deposed by the barbarian chieftain Odoacer, and with him ended a line stretching back to Augustus himself. Yet even as the purple cloak was torn from the boy's shoulders, the empire's spirit drifted eastward, into the glittering city of Constantinople, the new Rome, where emperors still wore crowns and the Senate still convened. There, the Byzantine Empire carried the torch for another 1,000 years, speaking Greek but dreaming Roman. And so, in a way, Rome never truly died. It simply changed its address. Meanwhile, in the ruins of the old city, life went on, quietly, humbly. The aqueducts stopped flowing, the public baths turned cold, and the great amphitheaters became nesting grounds for owls. Yet, among the broken columns and fallen statues, small fires burned in the hearths of those who refused to leave. Farmers tended vegetables where senators once debated. Children played in the forum, their laughter echoing against the cracked marble of Caesar's monuments. The grandeur was gone, but humanity remained. The people of Rome learned, as all survivors do, that even the greatest empires can end, and that life, stubborn and small, continues in the cracks. The Middle Ages rose from those ashes like a fog. To the people who came after, Rome was a legend, a dream half remembered. Travelers from the north wandered through its ruins in awe, describing a city built by giants. Monks copied Latin manuscripts by candlelight, preserving words they barely understood. Roman roads, though overgrown, still stretched across Europe, guiding pilgrims and merchants for centuries to come. And everywhere, Rome's shadow lingered in the law, in the language, in the stones themselves. Even as kings and knights rose to power, they borrowed the old Roman titles: imperator, senator, pontifex. To rule was to imitate Rome, whether one lived in Paris, London, or Constantinople. Architecture carried that legacy most clearly. Every arch, every dome, every column built after Rome bore its echo. The Gothic cathedrals of medieval Europe, those towering spires and ribbed vaults, were born from Roman engineering. The basilicas of the church, those long halls of prayer, were modeled after Roman courts of law. Even the word cathedral comes from cathedra, meaning the chair, a symbol of authority that once belonged to a Roman magistrate. The empire's body was gone, but its bones remained, reshaped into the skeleton of a new world. And what of its soul? That lingered in words. Latin, the language of emperors and scholars, refused to die. It fractured into daughters, Romanian, each carrying fragments of their mother's voice. Even English, distant and rugged, holds Latin's ghost in its veins. When we speak of justice, honor, empire, or glory, we are whispering Rome's language. The empire lives on in every sentence, every law, every story told by firelight about heroes, legions, and lost glory. It is there when you walk through a courthouse with marble pillars, or when a city planner lays out streets in grids, or when you stand beneath a dome and feel the weight of history pressing down like the heavens themselves. But not all of Rome's legacy is shining marble and poetry. There was darkness to cruelty dressed as civilization. Rome taught the world how to build, but also how to conquer, how to govern, but also how to exploit. It left behind not only roads and aqueducts, but hierarchies and empires built on blood. The colonial powers of later centuries, Spain, Britain, France, all borrowed Rome's blueprint. The idea that to rule was to civilize, that dominance was destiny. In their minds, they were heirs of Caesar, marching under new banners but following the same old path, the one that began with conquest and ended in decay. And yet, for all its sins, Rome's endurance lies in its contradictions. It was brutal and brilliant, savage and sublime. It enslaved millions and inspired billions. It crushed nations and preserved their stories. Its emperors declared themselves gods, but its collapse paved the way for faiths that worship humility. It burned books and built libraries, destroyed cities, and founded them anew. Perhaps that is why Rome fascinates us still, because it reflects our own nature, our hunger for greatness and our fear of losing it. The Romans built their empire on ambition, and that same ambition still drives us today in our politics, our cities, even our dreams. As centuries passed, the ruins of Rome became more than reminders of failure. They became symbols of resilience. Renaissance artists would one day wander through those broken columns, sketching the remnants of temples and arches. From their imaginations came a rebirth, a renaissance, literally rebirth, of Roman thought and beauty. Michelangelo's domes, Raphael's paintings, even the rules of perspective in art, all drew from the geometry of Rome. Poets like Dante and Petrarch spoke of the eternal city not as a corpse, but as a sleeping god waiting to awaken. And awaken it did, not through armies, but through art. Rome lived again, not in conquest, but in culture. In that rebirth lies a lesson. Empires may die, but ideas do not. The marble may crumble, the roads may crack, the statues may fall, but the mind, the idea of Rome, endures. It lives in the laws that govern our nations, in the architecture that defines our skylines, and in the languages we use to tell our stories. Even now, 2,000 years later, we measure power and civilization against Rome's ghost. We call our capitals new Romes. We name our systems republics. We build senates, forums, and courts, all echoes of a world that once was. So, if you ever stand before the ruins of the Colosseum at dusk, when the sky turns purple and gold, close your eyes for a moment. Listen, beneath the hum of the modern city, beneath the footsteps of tourists and the clicking of cameras, rhythmic sound of sandals on stone, the whisper of Latin prayers, the distant roar of a crowd that has been silent for 15 centuries. It is not the sound of ghosts, but of memory, the empire refusing to die. For Rome was never just a city, nor merely an empire. It was an idea, and ideas, like stars, do not burn out easily. They fade, they flicker, but even in the darkest night, their light still reaches us. So sleep, traveler of time, knowing that the Roman Empire still lives in the laws that govern you, in the words you speak, in the cities that rise around you. Its story is not over. It simply continues in quieter forms. For every civilization that comes after Rome carries a piece of its heart, both the glory and the warning. And perhaps, in the end, that is why history never really sleeps. It dreams, and in its dreams, the eternal city still stands, bathed in the golden light of an everlasting dawn. If you stand among the ruins of the Roman Forum at night, when the city has fallen quiet and the marble glows faintly beneath the moon, you can almost feel the weight of 1,000 stories pressing through the stones. The wind drifts through broken columns and arches, whispering in a language older than any alive today. Those whispers carry lessons, not shouted, but sighed, about power, pride, and the strange fragility of human greatness. The Romans believed their empire was eternal. They carved that belief into stone, minted it into coins, and taught it to their children as a fact of nature, as unshakable as the sunrise. But history, it seems, has a sense of irony. For all its roads, armies, and emperors, Rome could not defeat time itself. And in that truth lies its greatest lesson, that nothing made by human hands can last forever, but the desire to create something lasting never dies. Rome's first lesson is about ambition. From a cluster of huts beside the Tiber River, the Romans built the most powerful empire the world had ever known. They did not inherit greatness, they constructed it, brick by brick, road by road, victory by victory. And yet, ambition has two faces. It drives creation, but it also breeds greed. The same fire that built the empire also burned it down. The Romans sought glory, not only in battle, but in excess, in monuments that reached the heavens, in banquets that lasted for days, in wars fought more for pride than necessity. Their expansion was unstoppable until it wasn't. When every border had been conquered, they turned inward, and the same ambition that had driven them outward began to eat them from within. They forgot that greatness is not just power over others, but mastery of oneself. The fall of Rome, in many ways, was not caused by barbarians at the gates, but by the slow erosion of discipline and purpose behind them. The second lesson is about comfort. When the empire reached its height, its citizens grew used to ease the flowing water of aqueducts, the warmth of public baths, the abundance of bread and wine. Generations were born into luxury they had not earned, and so they forgot how to endure. The old Roman virtues, disciplina, gravitas, faded into words carved on forgotten statues. Comfort dulled their edge, and when hard times came, famine, plague, invasion, they were unprepared. Civilizations often die not because they are destroyed, but because they forget how to struggle. In the quiet years of peace, Rome lost its hunger, and with it, it is a warning whispered through time. Comfort, though sweet, can make us fragile. The third lesson lies in the danger of pride. The Romans called their empire the Mare Nostrum, our sea. They believed the world belonged to them by divine right. They saw themselves as bringers of order to chaos, of civilization to savagery. And for a time, they were right. Their roads connected continents. Their laws tamed wilderness. Their culture bridged languages. But pride, when unchecked, becomes blindness. Rome began to see its power as proof of its goodness. Conquest became destiny. Oppression became governance, and cruelty was justified as the price of progress. When you believe you are eternal, you stop listening to the world. You stop learning. The empire fell not only because it was attacked, but because it could no longer see itself clearly. The lesson is not that power corrupts, but that the illusion of infallibility destroys from within. Another whisper rises from the stones, a gentler one, about resilience. Though Rome fell, its essence endured. The ruins did not vanish. They became foundations. The ideas that once fueled its greatness, law, architecture, literature, philosophy, survived its collapse and seeded the future. Every time humanity rebuilds after destruction, it is, in some small way, Roman. The Renaissance, democracy, even modern engineering, all carry traces of that endurance. Rome teaches that failure is not the end. Every ruin is a beginning waiting to be reborn. What matters is not how long we stand, but what we leave behind when we fall. The next lesson is perhaps the quietest, the one hidden beneath all the grandeur. It is about humility. Rome's leaders often saw themselves as gods. They built statues higher than temples, demanded worship, and claimed divine favor in every victory. But the gods they tried to imitate, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, have long since faded into myth. What remains are the nameless, the builders, the slaves, the soldiers who carried the empire on their backs. The cobbler who repaired sandals for marching legions, the woman who sold figs in the marketplace, the scribe who copied laws by candlelight. They are Rome's true immortals. Their labor, not the emperor's egos, built the world. When we speak of Rome, we should remember them. History often crowns the few, but is carried by the many. And then there is the final lesson. the one that lingers like the scent of dust and rain in the air of the Forum. It is about memory. The Romans were obsessed with being remembered. They built arches to celebrate victories, carved names into every monument, and wrote epics to outlast death. But time has humbled them. Most names have been erased, most faces forgotten, and even their gods are gone. And yet, paradoxically, the more we forget their names, the more powerful their memory becomes. Because what survives is not the individuals, but the idea that humans can build something greater than themselves, that we can rise, fall, and rise again. Rome reminds us that memory is not just about the past, it is a bridge to the future. We build monuments not to be worshipped, but to remind those who come after us of what is possible and what is dangerous. So, what do the ruins whisper to us today? They remind us that civilization is not a permanent state, but a fragile balance, a dance between creation and decay. Every city, every nation, every age believes itself unshakable until the ground moves beneath it. But perhaps that's the point. Perhaps the purpose of history is not to warn us against repeating mistakes, for we always will, but to help us recognize the patterns, the rhythms of rise and fall, so that each time we begin again, we do it with a little more wisdom. Rome fell, but humanity did not. We learned, adapted, and continued. And yet, if Rome's story teaches us anything, it is that no amount of power or progress can replace meaning. Empires, like people, need purpose to live. When purpose fades, even marble crumbles. Maybe that is why Rome still captivates us, because we see in its story a reflection of our own world. The glass towers of our cities, the digital empires we build, the armies of machines that now replace legions, all of it feels eternal until it isn't. And somewhere, deep down, we know it. We sense the same fragility the Romans ignored. The lesson is simple. Build, but do not forget why. Progress without soul is just noise. So let the ruins of Rome stand as both warning and comfort. Warning, because they show how even the greatest can fall. Comfort, because they prove that beauty can survive collapse. Walk through the Colosseum at sunset, touch the warm stone, and you will feel it, the pulse of history, steady and patient. The empire is gone, but its echo still beats in the walls, in the language, in the very air. The Romans are dust, but their dream of greatness, of endurance, of meaning, still breathes through us. Perhaps that is the final, unspoken lesson of Rome, that while nothing lasts forever, everything leaves a trace. History, when you listen closely enough, breathes. It sighs through the cracks in old walls, hums through the dust of forgotten libraries, and murmurs beneath the marble bones of fallen empires. In Rome, that breath is everywhere. It rises from the ruins at dawn, when sunlight spills across the Colosseum's broken arches, and it lingers at dusk, when the air turns gold and heavy with memory. The eternal city, no longer an empire, yet still alive, dreams beneath its own stones. Its people walk the same streets as their ancestors, unaware that their footsteps echo those of senators, slaves, and soldiers who vanished centuries ago. The empire has ended, but its rhythm continues. Time, in Rome, does not move forward. It circles, endlessly, patiently, as if refusing to forget. To sleep through the story of Rome is to drift through the dreams of civilization itself. You can almost feel it, the pulse of the past, the gentle rise and fall of centuries, layered like sheets of sand. Beneath every cobblestone lies a buried lifetime, the laughter of a child in the forum, the clatter of chariot wheels on stone, the murmur of a poet reciting lines to the gods. And deeper still, beneath the ashes of empire and the soil of time, lies something softer, a lesson that history keeps whispering, that all greatness, no matter how vast, is made of moments. A civilization is not built in centuries, but in seconds, in the choices of those who live within it. Rome teaches us that even eternity can grow tired. Its emperors built monuments to defy death, and yet every column eventually cracked. Its armies conquered the world, but not themselves. Its poets wrote of glory, but their verses often ended in lament. The empire that named itself eternal learned, at last, that even marble turns to dust. But in that collapse, there was a strange beauty, a peace that no victory could bring, because when the noise of conquest faded, what remained was silence. And in that silence, Rome began to dream again, not of power, but of memory. That is how history works. It forgets loudly, but remembers quietly. Centuries after the legions disappeared, monks in candlelit rooms copied Roman texts by hand, their inked quills trembling over parchment. Renaissance artists walked among the ruins and imagined angels in the cracks of fallen gods. Philosophers looked to Rome's laws and rebuilt nations. The ruins did not fade, they transformed. Every generation finds something new within them. Some see warning, others see wonder. Some study them as relics, others worship them as proof that humanity can build beauty even in impermanence. Walk with me now through the Rome that remains. The streets are narrow, the air thick with the scent of stone, warmed by centuries of sun. You pass the Pantheon, still standing after 2,000 years, its oculus open to the sky, a perfect circle framing eternity. Rain has fallen through that opening for millennia, touching emperors and tourists alike. Inside, the air feels sacred, as if time itself pauses in reverence. The dome was once a temple to all gods. Now it is a church to one. Rome has changed, but it has never stopped believing in something greater than itself. Further down the hill, the Colosseum rests like a sleeping giant. Grass grows where lions once hunted. The air carries no screams now, only the low hum of wind and the distant sound of traffic. You imagine the crowd that once filled this place, 50,000 voices roaring as the gates opened, the sand trembling beneath the feet of men and beasts. That same sand lies beneath your shoes now, but it has forgotten the blood. The world moves on. What was once a theater of death is now a monument to endurance. The stones have learned mercy, and beyond the ruins, Rome breathes again in fountains that sparkle under moonlight, in cafes where people speak in the musical descendants of Latin, in bridges and piazzas built atop forgotten forums. The empire is gone, but its ghost is gentle now. It doesn't demand worship. It invites reflection. It reminds us that time does not destroy, it transforms. The same hands that once built fortresses now build museums. The same language that once commanded legions now tells love stories. Rome has not vanished. It has evolved. That is the quiet magic of history. It never truly ends. It simply changes its shape. If you close your eyes here, under the Roman sky, you can feel how history folds in on itself. The hum of scooters echoes the thunder of chariots. The glow of street lamps mirrors the torches that once lined the Via Appia. The laughter from a nearby cafe carries the same melody as a tavern 2,000 years ago. Nothing truly disappears. The past is not behind us. It sleeps beneath our feet, dreaming, waiting to be remembered. And perhaps that is Rome's final lesson, that memory is its own kind of immortality. The city has died 100 times and been reborn 100 more. Fires, invasions, earthquakes, each tried to erase it, yet none succeeded. The empire may have fallen, but the dream endures. It endures in every nation that builds roads, in every courtroom that seeks justice, in every architect who sketches a dome, in every dreamer who believes their work can outlast their lifetime. To build is to hope, and in that hope, Rome still lives as you drift further into the calm of this story. Imagine the Tiber River flowing softly through the heart of the city. It has watched everything from shepherds founding the first huts, to emperors burning the world for glory, to artists sketching angels in the dust. The river knows that time never stops. It only changes form. It knows that civilizations, like rivers, must flow or stagnate. Rome's story, then, is not a tragedy. It is a river winding, endless, patient. The night deepens. The city grows quieter. The ruins, bathed in silver light, no longer feel ancient. They feel eternal. Somewhere, a bell tolls, echoing through the valley like a heartbeat. You can almost believe that the stones themselves are alive, whispering to one another across centuries. We are still here, they seem to say. We are still dreaming. And perhaps that is the most human truth of all, that even when we fall, even when time forgets our names, the dream continues. The world remembers not the walls we built, but the reason we built them. So sleep now, beneath the vast shadow of history. Let the murmurs of Rome lull you into rest. Imagine the empire not as a place, but as a pulse, still beating somewhere in the heart of humanity. Every sunrise over a city skyline, every bridge that spans a river, every monument that defies gravity, all are descendants of Rome's dream. The eternal city never truly fell. It only closed its eyes for a moment to dream of us.